I'm really excited to be able to introduce Oscar to you all today, particularly since Oscar comes from the city of Cincinnati in Ohio. A little small fact about me, I actually spent 5 years living in the city of Cincinnati, and that's actually not why Oscar is here. He's here because of the achievement he has been able to accomplish with his team at the city of Cincinnati. But living there 20 years ago, and then coming back last year just to have another look, the transformation is amazing. And so I really am hoping you'll get a lot out of this session, because I can tell you firsthand, this is a city that is active in thinking differently and ensuring that the residents have a tremendous quality of life. So I'll just tell you a little bit about Oscar. He leads a team of 90 employees dedicated to improving the economy and neighbourhoods of Cincinnati. The Department of Community and Economic Development has a capital operating budget of $50 million. Any director in the room, don't get too many ideas. $50 million. And oversees all of the downtown and neighbourhood development projects, human services, and of course public parking. And when we say downtown, that just means the CBD area. So just so we get that terminology right. But ladies and gentlemen, I'm just so glad that we've been able to have these tremendous international speakers here. So can please welcome to the stage Oscar from Cincinnati. Thank you, bud.
All right, let's see if these are up here. So good afternoon, everyone. You guys doing all right? So we are going to, I hope, build upon all the things and all the themes that you guys have been talking about over the last 2 days. And hopefully you'll see yourselves in some of the examples. Let me make sure this is good. See yourselves in some of the examples of some of the innovative things that we've done in Cincinnati. And so I'll walk you through some of that transformation. And I'll identify some of the challenges that we've encountered, and then some of the actions and the strategy we've deployed to really make Cincinnati a city to watch in the future. And so excited to be here on behalf of our mayor and our city council. Would like to welcome all of you to Cincinnati eventually. So by a show of hands, can you just raise your hands if you've been to the U.S.? Great. Could you keep your hands raised if you've been to Ohio, Cincinnati? All right, so I've got some opportunities here. We'll look at them as opportunities. We'll get you there. The good thing is Trump hasn't banned any Australians, hopefully, to get you guys to the United States. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into this presentation. So here I've broken down just what we're going to talk about, and it's kind of hard to see on this. I'll show you guys some love on here. So first we'll talk about Cincinnati. So I want to make sure that everyone understands kind of the history and what's going on in Cincinnati, so you can understand the challenges we faced and really where we are today. Then I'll talk about some of the key ingredients. And so the key ingredients for us are not all inclusive, but ingredients that have helped Cincinnati really perpetuate growth. And what I'm going to focus on are ingredients that are in the control of the government, right? So I think one of the challenges with government is that a lot of individuals put out into the universe things that they can't control, right, or influence. And so that often hinders strategy. So we'll talk about some of that. We'll also talk about the pillars of partnership. And so what I want to drive home for you is, partnership is synonymous with innovation. And so you really need to think about how you're building strong partnerships and deploying strategies that really get you to the next level. And then last but not least, I'll walk you through 4 case studies that hopefully that you can then think through and apply here in Logan and then Queensland. So let me start off with a little bit about myself. And so someone had asked me earlier, that's not a picture of me, it's my grandfather. And it looks like we are potentially related to Bruno Mars. I don't know if anybody is familiar with Bruno Mars, but I am biracial. And so I am the product of good public policy. And so my grandfather migrated from Mexico as a result of some of the innovation at the time after the World War II, when they were looking for labor to supply some of the manufacturing plants. And so he was looking for the ability to take care of his family, looking for opportunities. What you see below you is my mother's father, my grandfather, maternal grandfather. And he came out of the rural South and was really fascinated by the arts. Was a jazz musician, played the bass with Duke Ellington and others. And again, through investments in the arts, very similar to what we talked about today, he went from the rural South to Chicago and made a career as a taxi driver during the day, but a jazz musician at night. And so as a result of that, my parents met in Chicago, and then, obviously I'm here today. And so I think innovation for me is really about good public policy. creating opportunities for people like myself. I'm the first in my family to graduate from college and to go on to get advanced degrees. And so through public policies, through smart investments, you create opportunities. And so that's why I took the position after working in New York in management consulting, really wanted to make an impact and make sure that people that looked like myself were in roles like myself. And so I think it's just a good story to tell as you think about the people that you're impacting, because really what you're talking about, smart cities are about creating opportunities for people, not just yourselves. So Ohio. Ohio has a lot of commonality with Logan and some of the surrounding areas. So you can see here from the maps, we've kind of zoomed in here. If you're familiar with the United States, the smaller map shows you where Cincinnati is, kind of in the Midwest, as we refer to it affectionately in the U.S. But we're in a tri-state economy. So as you guys talk about regional economies, very similar to that. We are a logistics hub, given where we are in the United States. We have the opportunity, you can see the highway network based on infrastructure. We've been able to leverage that and make great strides in logistics as a logistics hub. Historically, and I'll walk you through a timeline, very similar to, I believe, Logan, from the conversations I gathered, you guys have a history of meatpacking. And so we, like Logan, have a history of meatpacking and leverage that to either take the lard to create companies that are now Fortune 500 companies. The one thing I want to drive here is, we've had our challenges, but we're on an upswing. And so we've seen a lot of opportunities. In the last 2 years, we've created over 3,000 jobs for our city. That's a large number. And we facilitated almost $1 billion in investment. And then in 2017, this year, we're going to exceed that 2-year goal by doing over $1 billion in investment this year, is our aspirational goal. And so that growth is coming to fruition because of global trends, right? The opportunities related to technology and workforce. So people are looking at affordability, they're looking at new ways to conduct commerce. And so as the workforce looks to move into areas as they're boxed out of gateway cities, I think secondary markets like Cincinnati, second-tier cities, really have a great opportunity if they can leverage that to create sustainable communities. And I think very similar to Cincinnati, Logan has that opportunity as people are priced out of Sydney, Brisbane, and other areas. All right. Maybe not? There you go. So let's talk about perception and creating your own narrative. So I don't know if you guys are familiar. Yeah. So for those of you who can't see, I'll read this quote to you. And Mark Twain, if you don't know, is a famous author who wrote Huckleberry Finn and a bunch of other great novels. And so what he said was, when the end of the world comes, I want to be in Cincinnati because it's always 10 years behind the times. And so I think cities, and having worked in consulting, this is a challenge, right? It's the perception. It's not necessarily your soundbite, but it's the perception you have to deal with, and you have to change that narrative. And so we've done a lot in the area of changing the soundbite, right, or changing the narrative, but you're always up against challenges, right? But you have to dictate your own success. And so I'll talk about some of the things that we did to make that happen. So here, let me just walk in. I've kind of hit some of this. This is our timeline, which is pertinent as I walk you through some of our case studies. And so to the far left, you'll see that we were founded in the 1700s. And so at the time, really a city of innovation. We rivaled New York. We rivaled Chicago. And you can see a lot of the money and wealth came out of transportation. The fact that we were on a river city and we were leveraging the pork, that we would take the lard and turn it into soap and candles. Procter Gamble, which is based in Cincinnati and is a World Fortune 500 company, is actually as a result of that family. So a lot of the family and wealth that was in Cincinnati still remains in Cincinnati. So there's a huge divide between the wealthy and then those that are unfortunately not as wealthy. Some of the other things you'll see here is just, I'll fast forward here. We, through the 1800s, because of that wealth, saw a lot of innovation. So we had the first concrete high-rise developed in Cincinnati. The Roebling Bridge, which you'll see in some of the workshops that I'll do later, is a beautiful bridge. It was a prototype for the Brooklyn Bridge in New York. And so we have this legacy of innovation. As you fast forward in like many cities, manufacturing had been a key to our economy. And unfortunately, because we did not diversify, we ran into challenges after in the early 1900s when we started to wean ourselves off of manufacturing, which then perpetuated problems that we had socially, economically. And so we ended, unfortunately, in 2001, hit a riot, or not hit a riot, but as a result of an unfortunate killing of a young African-American male, the city went to 5 days of rioting and really disrupted our local economy. That on the heels of 2008, the recession and the mortgage crisis. So again, these are just all things that happened that potentially impacted our success and challenges we had to overcome to make sure that we were successful. If you fast forward to the last 5 years, we've really seen an upswing. And so, our hashtag, and I'd love for you guys to use it, is Watch Cincy Rise. And so we really think we're a city on the rise, and again, going back to that perception and narrative. So now I'm going to show you guys a video. And so I think as you think about your branding, because I think that's where you are, right? Make sure that you incorporate the stories and the narratives of the individuals that are in your cities. And so this video really characterizes how our city is perceived by the people that live there.
We've crowned our city the queen.
From the river's edge to the tops of our 7 hills.
We're rooted in tradition, but restless with ambition.
We have the first professional baseball team.
Our Roebling Bridge inspired the Brooklyn Bridge.
And we're home to the second largest Oktoberfest in the world.
We're a destination for food lovers.
And bourbon and beer lovers. Crafters built this town.
Our universities are world class.
And our sports fans are one of a kind.
We're home to one of the country's top symphony orchestras, second oldest opera, and a celebrated ballet.
Our art is public, private, unique, and priceless.
With both Fortune 500 companies and a thriving startup community, we've been deemed the best big city for business.
Yeah, we're so much more than this.
Grab a bite and a pint in OTR and experience the renaissance of one of the largest historic neighborhoods in the country.
Ride the new streetcar downtown to the Banks and Smill Park, just one of our nationally acclaimed parks and green spaces.
We're innovators, dreamers, and doers. And we're a true original, where Made in Cincy is a source of pride.
Great, so I hope you enjoyed that. Appreciate that. So on the heels of that, when we go out and do public speaking, this is now the narrative that we've created, right? And so by simply editing Mark Twain's quote, we are suggesting that we are a city you want to live in versus one that you don't want to live in. So very prideful of what's going on in the city. So let's dig into the weeds and be more granular about what's happening. So here, these are just a few, what I would say are key ingredients to what makes a thriving economy. And I'm going to step over here so I can just see some of these. The first of which is, and I'll walk you through these, they are transparency, a balancing of needs, data, and culture. So let's talk about the first one. So transparency. We, under the new administration, and so my mayor has been in office for almost 3 years. It's an election year now. Those that work in local government can appreciate election years. We call it funny season because a lot goes on during that time. But within that short period, we've done a lot. And a key to our success has been transparency, right? So a lot of people perceive that things are often created behind closed doors, right? So in using collaboration, making sure people that are involved in the overall process, providing transparency goes a long way with getting things approved and making traction. So just one thing you should consider. And I'm assuming that most of you are already doing that. The other piece is as we go out and we try to facilitate investment, it's really a balancing of needs, especially when you're talking about public-private partnerships. You can see that the scale is somewhat tipped to the community needs, and so we have to have realistic expectations about what the market will bear and what people can bear as a result of projects, financing in the market. You can see we've put City Hall square in the middle, and so City Hall would be very similar to what your council is, and so where we conduct business and do public policy, and then the market needs. And so if there isn't a balance, obviously you won't get traction, right? You'll just continue to spin your wheels. Other key piece for our success is data. And so there's been a lot of conversations about smart cities and data and what you do with it. I mean, cities have so much untapped potential related to data. Given that we have a lot of it, we just don't do anything with it. And so what the city of Cincinnati has done is created an Office of Performance and Analytics where we're taking that data and mining it, and we're making it public. We're making a dashboard so people can see why we're making decisions, but then also use that information, aggregate it so they can make apps and also make smart decisions as well for the city. So it's really that collaboration. And then I think this is the last one, culture. And so we have created a culture of leading with solutions versus just perpetuating problems by adding to the red tape, right? And so within my team, if we were to say no, and because we've never done it before, we wouldn't be at $1 billion of investment over 2 years. We wouldn't be trying to exceed our goals in 1 year. And so really, culture goes a long way when you're courting investment and you're looking to continue to perpetuate growth. So here we just try to outline a very simple framework. Obviously, every city looks at things differently, but I think these are 3 things that have worked out well for us. The first of which, again, driving home that whole collaboration. This whole 2 days has been nothing about collaboration. The piece that I think you should also take into consideration is the inclusion piece. So make sure that you're including people. Inclusion for us is the diversity, making sure that there's opportunities for the people that are in your neighborhoods or the surrounding areas. Make sure that the companies represent and look like the people that you're serving. Strategy. So we, again, kind of hit on this earlier. We've done a lot related to strategy. And so cities are great about creating planning documents and strategy that sit on shelves. So we're creating strategy that's agile and changes with the market, right? Something that doesn't sit on a shelf. As administrations change, you often see turnover, and people don't even read those documents. So we're creating documents that, again, have collaboration, that are agile to change with the market and the trends. With technology and everything, things are changing daily. And so it doesn't make sense to create a robust document that sits on a shelf. And so we've taken a very executive summary approach to some of our strategy, although there's a lot of detail behind it. And then action. And so action here, we're really referring to the execution, right? And so making sure that your workforce, and whether it's public or private, you understand the dynamics of building those partnerships, but you also know how to facilitate that, right? And so if you understand both sides of the aisle, it's a lot easier to execute on these strategies and these different deals. So next, I'm going to walk you through 4 case studies. Hopefully we can do some more interactive. You guys can ask questions. I've really just pulled out some of the key things about these case studies, but over the conversations of yesterday and today, thought that some of these were pertinent given some of the challenges and opportunities you guys are dealing with now. So the first, as the mayor has alluded to, is OTR. Affectionately, we refer to it as OTR, but it's over the Rhine. And so just the history here is when our city was founded, there was a lot of Germans that had come over to the United States and helped to create Cincinnati. And at the time, there was a channel that came through and reminded a lot of people of the Rhine in Germany. And so affectionately, we called it over the Rhine, and now we refer to it as OTR. But as a result of our timeline, a lot of disinvestment has gone to this neighborhood. And so as the mayor suggested, one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in the U.S., we had seen a loss of population. At the peaks of the 1900s, we had several thousand people, and it had gotten as low as down to 2,000. So really, a lot of disinvestment, very dangerous neighborhood, and again, where the riots kicked off in 2001. So if you fast forward today, and it's hard to see the beauty of some of the buildings, and so this, a large portion of this neighborhood is on the historic register. And so what we didn't do is just go in and bulldoze all these homes and different buildings, but we actually refurbished a lot of these. And so you'll see here on the right-hand side, it was a church that was in dire disrepair that we've created now into a restaurant and bar. And so activating those spaces has gone a long way into creating a sense of place. And so this is just one example. We've renovated over 1,000 properties, put $1 billion into this neighborhood, leveraging both public and private partnerships, money that was seeded by private companies and money by the city of Cincinnati. And so here, the entity, I think very similar to maybe Invest, Logan, we created a 3CDC. And so OTR, although there's not a map in front of you, if you can visualize the central business district sits north of that. And so they're responsible for looking at investment that is facilitated on that lateral. And so making sure that the core of our city is really strong and vibrant. Again, $17 million was seeded by a board of the CEOs within our city. And so they gave $17 million because they realized that they couldn't retain talent if there was challenges within the core of the city. they couldn't continue to perpetuate growth in their businesses until these problems were fixed. So Procter Gamble, the company that I told you that obviously brands and does a lot of soap, actually gave $50 million. And it's a revolving fund. So the money then goes back into projects as they make profit. And a huge part of why, when the U.S. economy was tanking in 2008, we were able to make investments because we had these funds available when lending and banks wouldn't lend to anyone. So you can see, and this is, again, you have to visit the neighborhood. It's hard to tell from these pictures, but on the left-hand side, you can see how everything was boarded up. So literally, this whole neighborhood was boarded up, and we've gradually just gone down, and the story is phenomenal to the point, and as the mayor suggested, million-dollar condos. We're definitely thinking about affordable housing, so individuals that were in this neighborhood originally can retain or stay in that neighborhood. The other great piece of the story here is kind of mixed use properties. And so at store or retail level, or rather at the surface level, the street level, we've created a lot of retail. And because large box retail wouldn't come into our neighborhoods, we incentivize small business owners to come into the space. And we're flexible in the regime associated with our rents. And so something that's very common in the US is percentage rents. And so based on their sales versus a flat fee, which would have been a hurdle for these entrepreneurs, we've allowed them to operate in these spaces, and now they're starting their third and fourth restaurants, small boutiques, and it's really become very organic. And so as the US market starts to appreciate things that are more organic, craft beers versus these larger brand labels, we're really at the top of that curve. So the next project I want to talk to you about is the banks. And so very similar to you, we are on a river, and we not constantly, we do experience flooding. And so this is a great example of how we took underutilized land and monopolized on that, leveraging our relationships, again, partnership with federal and state agencies to leverage transportation funds to reconnect a street grid. And so in the US, in the 1950s, Eisenhower created a bill that created the highway system, which really made us competitive. It was originally done for defense, but then eventually, made us very attractive related to commerce because we could facilitate that. What it did, unfortunately, as you can see from these pictures, it disconnected neighborhoods. And so while there were families that were on the riverbank, when the highway cut them off, it made it much harder for them to access, related to access. That, coupled with the fact that this was in a floodplain, made it very hard for us to do anything with development. So if you look at it today, and I have a better picture on this next slide, we have now done close to 600 units. We have a phase 3 of another Yetta units, will be several hundred units. We have over 106,000 square feet of retail, and then we have office space as well. And so you can see here, this has been completed. This is a residential tower, and GE Global Operations has opened up its first global operations center in the US. And so very instrumental to our local economy. And the purpose and the reason why they located there was because we had a sense of place. This is off the streetcar alignment, so strategic investments in our streetcar have allowed for this company to retain and bring in millennials because they want to be downtown and they want to take advantage of, again, a livable, sustainable community. What's interesting about this, and back to the floodplain, as you guys experience floods, we've built 3 or 4 levels of parking. And so we've elevated this unusable land on a parking structure that allows us then to, at least you can see some of this commercial real estate that we've created. And so this is it today. It's in between the 2 stadiums, and we're still building it out, but eventually those decks will extend out to the green space, and will continue to perpetuate opportunities related to commercial development. The next case study I'll walk you through is our innovation corridor. This is a great collaboration with our medical systems, and I believe it's either a Harvard or Princeton economist had talked about anchor institutions. And so I think this is a great opportunity for you as you think about how you think about partnerships. And so when you think about the concept of anchor institutions, for us, the medical, or the hospitals rather, within one of our neighborhoods have some shared utility, right? And so while they're taking advantage of some of the proximity in that neighborhood to downtown, they also should share in the benefit as well as invest in those neighborhoods. And so we're working actively with them to create this innovation corridor. And so you can see here, as a result of investments in infrastructure that tapped this or opened up this land, 670 acres have been opened up, which where you have an abundance of land might not be a challenge, but in an urban core area like ourselves, having that much available space, and not all of that is usable, some of it's residential, to create opportunities for new businesses is just transformational for us. And so this is underway. We're still in our acquisition stages, but have acquired over 100 acres of land, or 100 parcels rather, closer to 70 acres of land. And so it's a huge opportunity for us. So here you can just see some of the pictures. These are some of the economic estimates that this project will create for us. And what we're thinking about doing is related to smart city. As we build this out, we're thinking through smart infrastructure. We're thinking about how parking and cars will be very different in the future. And so I'm being very thoughtful about how that'll all come to fruition. And we're also thinking about how we leverage technology, as that's a growing part of the medical sector. The one thing I failed to mention is the hospitals have created a consortium, and they're leveraging their balance sheet to complement the money of ours and the private sector to do these developments. So very much a key piece to our success in this, what we refer to as our second central business district. And so this is just renderings of what that'll look like. Within this neighborhood, again, a lot of social and economic challenges. And so to have this here, one of the things we're talking about is inclusion. So we're talking about workforce. We're making sure that as these developers come in, they make sure that they hire locally. They're creating jobs and opportunities for the people that live in this neighborhood so that they can benefit from investments like these. Centrifuge, and so this should be exciting for a lot of you. I think over the last, yesterday we talked about innovation hubs. So again, a great example of how Cincinnati is leading the charge. So this is again in OTR. OTR, again, it was one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in the country. The only danger you have now is probably getting run over by a 40-year-old on a skateboard. It's very hippie. And so you can see how it's changed. But this is, again, some of the dilapidated buildings that we invested $9 million into to create an innovation hub and with the private sector. And so this is Centrifuge, and it's a play on words. It's really the fusion of creating resources for the startup community. And we think this is a good best practice. Rather than, Kim had suggested this yesterday, we've been approached by a lot of big companies to tap into the smart city space. We think those opportunities should come organically, and so making smart investments in the digital economy, we think that we'll be able to be the masters of our own fate. So here you can see some of the built out space. And so within here, and what they've done is they've created the opportunity of pairing collaboration and capacity building with funding. So within this building, you have accelerators, incubators, VC firms, and it's really a best practice in that the funds that are raised, part of them public and part of them private, invest across the country, but we require those investors to come into our market and look at our businesses as well. So we're not limited to just our market because we realize that we're still growing. And so I think most cities would just assume that if you're raising funds, you would limit it to your area. But the exposure we've gotten from bringing in VCs in from California and New York has just built our market and built the awareness about what's going on. Here again, just some of the space. You can imagine how dilapidated the buildings were, and now to see this collaborative open space. As you know, startups, the biggest challenge for them a lot is real estate. They can't afford leases. They can't afford some of the overhead associated with that. So giving them the opportunity to become members of this organization and work out of this space creates collaboration, provides them with resources, and then obviously taps them into funding and financing. So in wrapping up, I just wanted to drive home, again, I think the key piece of this and why we've been successful, again, are these pillars of partnership, being collaborative, thinking about inclusion, making sure that everyone is at the table, making sure that you're deploying strategies that are agile, but then also thinking about action and executing, and making sure you're thoughtful about that, taking into consideration the partners that you're working with. So with that, I'll turn it over. Thanks. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, Oscar. And I'm going to take some questions from the floor, but before we do, I just wonder if you could paint for us the picture of what that riot looked like sometime ago. So you sort of just glossed over that, but give us an understanding from your perspective, because we've had street disruptions in our area. We've also had across Australia, but if you could just give us an idea of what you actually went through as a city.
Yeah, no, they're terrible time. Utter chaos, and I think it was a lot of frustration. Obviously, even with what's going on now, it's at the forefront, cultural divide. So the city was literally shut down. The neighborhood itself was shut down. There were people in the streets rioting, breaking into stores, fighting. And so it was just, an outlet for people that were trying to express their frustration. And so even today we reference it. We talk about the challenges that occurred and why that came to fruition. And then the social challenges we're still dealing with. And hence why we've taken a platform of inclusion and being deliberate on public policies so that we don't revisit those same situations.
So it was already a bad suburb, let's just admit it, and then the riots happened. And now you've got this phenomenal opportunity where people have bought into the council agenda. So how did you help people get from that perception of it's bad to be in that area, to even walk around, to now want to live there and participate in that environment? Yeah,
I mean, I think the one thing that never left was the passion of the people in that neighborhood, right? And it's been complemented by new people that are coming in. It helps when you have the available resources to make the transition, but it really starts at the grassroots level. And it's not without its challenges, right? There's still very much a very tough conversation about inclusion, making sure that we have affordable housing so that people that have grown up there can remain in that neighborhood. So we're thinking through policies that allow that to happen. But I think it's one piece at a time. And so, one development, one house, one building gradually perpetuated itself to the point where now the momentum is so strong, it's spilling out into the other neighborhoods. So I think a lot of cities try to create markets. This is an example of us influencing the market, right, and pulling together partners.
Was there a first project that sort of started it all?
Yeah, there's one, and I glossed over this, Washington Park. So Washington Park was an area of green space. Really, it became an eyesore. A lot of drug use was there, loitering. And so what we did was potentially, through CDC's leadership, we wanted to preserve the green space, but we knew parking was an issue. So we literally dug up the green space and put parking underneath so that we have to tie up the streets and use that to go back over. And now we program it. So a key piece of our success is that we program a lot of our public areas. So there's activities for the neighborhood, which then creates these sustainable and livable communities. So people don't need to go to the suburbs, or if they do, they want to, that's fine. But they can live in the city and grow a family.
Was there a call to action from the city at all? Did the council say, look, we need help over here, we want you to come and eat here, be part of this process? Was there ever a call to action?
Oh, definitely. And that action was both council and the private sector, right? P&G couldn't have this eyesore in their backyard. Kroger, which is one of our largest grocers, couldn't afford from a retention of employees, right? If it's not safe enough to walk, this is proximity to downtown is literally a suburb or neighborhood we refer to as neighborhoods right to the central business district. And so it was not safe for people to be downtown after a certain time as a result of the crime that was spilling out into the central business district. So it was something that needed to be resolved.
So what did that call look like? How did you get the message out? Come to OTR all of a sudden and you're not going to get mugged?
Yeah, no, I think...
Is this going to be...
it's a good question. I think, again, the altruism within our city, the business leadership really saw this as an opportunity versus just a challenge, and led some of that charge, along with the mayor at that time, Mayor Lucan, which I tip my hat to, had the leadership to say, hey, we need to do something bold, and we need to get behind this.
Okay. And we also noticed last time we were there, lots of street art was part of the change process. What did that look like? Was it a program that the council did? Was there funding for artists?
Yeah. So through our department, we actually fund the arts program, Arts Wave. But it's not just ourselves. It wouldn't be sustainable with just the city. The private, they do a lot of fundraising. And so we use art to activate space prior to the market going in, so people start to feel different about it. And so that one investment tied with art starts to change perception.
Yeah. Okay. And so the Fortune 500s that decided to just look on a map and go, I'm going to go to Cincinnati. What came first? Was the OTR in transition, and then the traction started from the council for the Fortune 500s to be part of that process, or did they decide to come to you, or was there a traction from the city to get them there to help with job creation?
Great question. So the good thing about Cincinnati, a lot of the Fortune 500 companies, so we have a long history of retaining and helping startups since the innovation hub. So Kroger, Macy's, if you're familiar with the retailer, P&G all grew in Cincinnati. So there was a sense of ownership of that neighborhood versus a company that we might have brought in that didn't have the same ownership. So again, collaborative effort.
And one of the things that you mentioned when we were just off stage earlier was that there seems to be a trend in North America that the cities are starting to realise people don't live in them anymore. Yeah. And you spent the last 50 years pushing everyone out of the cities.
That's exactly right.
And so if you go to the States, there's those big ring roads around the cities, and the major shopping centres are on the ring roads, and that's where the suburbs are. When did you realise as a city council that you'd like to attract people to live in the city and not out in the suburbs?
Yeah, I think, and I've been there by full disclosure for the last 3 years, but been working in consulting and at the federal government level in cities and states for a number of years. And so I think, the trend itself, for me at least, the last 10 years, we've seen this resurgence. And again, this is as a result of workforce and talent. People no longer want to, have to live in congestion and realize they can have a better lifestyle in other areas. Affordability, again, no one wants to live in a micro unit in New York City like myself. Yeah. And they want to be able to have a home and have that ownership. And so those are the opportunities. And I think as you see those trends, again, secondary, in the U.S. we refer to as Tier 2 cities, I think there's a huge opportunity as long as you harness that growth properly.
So looking back, what advice would you give to the Southeast Queensland region, for example, where we're pushing to have more people move into the suburbs and business hubs around the suburbs as opposed to being in the CBD?
Yeah.
Is there a danger to that?
No, I think, and I think some of the speakers said this earlier, right? Best practices need to be tailored to whatever the market is, right? I think the key piece of that is having a conversation around all partners. This regionalism, having everyone here together collectively to see how that growth works and tailoring it to your needs. I think it can be approached a number of different ways as long as everyone's on the same page.
Okay. Are there any questions from the floor at all?
But Paul doesn't have a question? Is Paul here from yesterday? I thought he had some pretty good tough
while
questions.
We're waiting for a question, what about public transport? I noticed you've got light rail up there. I think you called it something else.
Streetcar, yeah.
Streetcar, there we go. And isn't that name design? No.
Yeah.
Show my age. But the light rail option, when, public transport was always a bit of a mess in Cincinnati, the bus system wasn't always, used to confuse me. Yeah. I thought it was a language barrier, but maybe, so what did you do to, what was the reason you changed it to say we need light rail? Was that part of the transition for OTR? Or
it was. And I'll be honest, it's very controversial in the city right now. And so let me just give you some background on that. So prior, I worked for the Obama administration in what they referred to as the Infrastructure Bank, the TIFIA credit program. And so I think, let me take a step back even further than that. So at the time when subways were being built in the U.S., Cincinnati was starting to build out their subway system and decided not to move forward. So I actually started building some of the tunnels. And that's why I think Chicago and New York grew faster than us and are much bigger than we are today. So I think there's a strong leadership group within the city that understands the benefits of transit and transportation. The challenge is that it's hugely subsidized, right? And so it's hard for cities in the U.S. to be able to make these investments without some altruism, or not necessarily altruism, but investment from the federal and state government. So the debate right now isn't so much around, is transit good? Everyone agrees there. It's just how do you pay for it? And what do you put before that? And so that's the challenge that we have today. So our mayor very much ran on a platform of, not necessarily supporting that project, but supporting it as a result of where we get the funding. No one had really thought through how we do that. And so I think a lot of people want to cut ribbons, but never think about the long-term life cycle of a project. And so that's a challenge. Yeah.
Wow, very good. So Mayor Cranley, Mayor Cranley, and his agenda's been economic development growth the whole way through the last 3 years of his term. And so when you have looked back on the transformation, was it driven from the representatives of the people, or was it driven from the bureaucracy?
I think it was ground roots. Everyone, the city is so prideful. As you saw from the video, people love the city, right? The challenge is that people don't understand how to connect the dots and how to make it come to fruition, right? And so that's why you need leadership like yourself in positions that you can create public policies and help people get to the finish line.
So what role do you see the elected representatives play in this space?
It's
you can
key.
be honest.
Yeah, no. It's key. Yeah. It starts with the culture and setting the tone, right? So if you're not setting a culture that's pro-business, but understanding that the social piece, and so this is the debate in the U.S. right now, right? Not pulling any cards here or any punches, rather. You can run a business successfully, right? But you need to think, to run a business successfully, you don't necessarily have to think always about the social impacts, right? And so it's very different than running a state government, right? You need to be altruistic, you need to think about the social impacts, and you have to balance that. And so that's where we are. And I think the mayor gets that, right? You have to make investments that are somewhat strategic now, so you have a long-term view, but you also have to execute on stuff that's in the short term as well.
Okay, great. Are there any other any questions, ladies? Here we go, one over here.
Thank you. Bob Clarkson, mate. Do you have any elevated rail over in Cincinnati, or is it just light rail ground-based?
Yeah, so we just have the streetcar, the light rail that we have. We don't have any elevated rail.
Not like Vancouver?
Not like Vancouver, correct.
Okay.
Any other questions? Right over here, brown tie. There we go.
Is that Brian? Paul Burton, Cities Research Institute at Griffith University. I'm sorry if you said this at the beginning and I missed it because I was still out the back. Cincinnati is part of a metro region.
It is.
And I mean, you were just touching on, population flight from city centres to suburbs.
Correct.
To what extent is there a kind of metropolitan governance structure that brings together the city and its surrounding local governments,
the
the equivalent of a Southeast Queensland Council of Mayors, for example, that we might have here? And is that essential to the success of the city itself?
I'll try to tackle that, and maybe people that are more versed on both the government structure in the U.S. and Australia will help me out here. So I believe Australia is centralized, right, related to your federal and state government. We are decentralized. So the states, although we report into the federal government, have their own programs and funding. From the map, we are actually at a tri-state. So there's 3 states that come to the culmination. So prior to, I think, Cranley's administration, there was a lot of talk, very territorial. The sense of collaboration amongst the 3 states has gotten a lot better. We just held our first foreign direct investment is a huge piece for us. We think that's how we'll perpetuate growth. And so we had a regional symposium. We brought in state leaders from the 3 states. And I think that was one of the first things we had done as a tri-state area.
Tony, do you have a question?
Affordable housing.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on what that looks like?
Yeah, so the administration, as well as some of our council members, are looking at that. We don't have a policy to date. We have dedicated, similar to some of the RFPs that I think others were talking about earlier. So we do once a year an RFP process where we allocate money. Last year we dedicated $2 million. We look at ourselves as gap financing, so we're not we're not paying for the whole project, but we're using that to seed projects so we can leverage it. So last year we did a leverage for every dollar. We brought in 8 private dollars, and so that's how we are able to do the $1 billion in investment. So to your point, we don't have an actual policy. We're working through that now. Members of council are, and we hope to have something here shortly.
Okay, I think there was one more question here somewhere, over the back. Here we go. Are there any over here? If I can come back to. No. Okay, great.
Just a quick question. Really, it's about companies like Tesla and all of the great innovations that we're hearing about via social media. The Hyperloop, driverless cars, driverless trucking, drone futures. These are the things that are sort of 5 to 10 years out, and yet some cities are actually embracing driverless taxi fleets now. Are there any challenges or opportunities that you're looking at in terms of advocating for Hyperloop in your area, or?
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, this is at the forefront of all our conversations, especially for these large master plan developments where we're thinking about parking. Do we have have the same requirements for parking? We're thinking about the disruption associated with jobs. And so, very similar to a lot of municipalities, we have chronically underemployed people, right? And so as we try to give them a hand up versus a handout, we're giving them training. One of the areas we've been very successful is in CDL drivers, and so these are the people that are driving commercial vehicles. And so we can take somebody out of poverty once they've completed this training and make $60,000 in the U.S., which is, again, if their minimum wage is at $12, which I think it's slightly higher here, is a huge benefit. The problem is, as we think about disruption in these autonomous vehicles, potentially that'll be disrupted. And so we're thinking through those opportunities. So both opportunities and challenges. Columbus, which is our sister city within the state of Ohio, won, I think it was a $50 million grant from the U.S. Department of Transportation on smart cities, and they are actually thinking through autonomous vehicles. Uber and others have pilots where they're looking at the terrain. We have a lot of different terrain throughout the state, and so doing pilots there as well.
You've got a lot of universities in Cincinnati, and you mentioned yesterday that education is a key part.
Yeah.
In fact, we use the model of Strive that's in Cincinnati for our Logan Together program, the collective impact. So what role does education play, whether it be university level or secondary school level, in that city transformation process?
Oh, it's huge. I mean, when we are courting new businesses, we lead with the fact that we have universities that are bringing out top-notch talent.
Yeah.
We partner with the community colleges and the universities to make sure that that talent is being trained for the opportunities within the workforce. And so, again, as we look at opportunities, we wouldn't be able to do that without the universities. Yeah.
Sparked a new question right here.
Yeah.
So what are some elements that you helped build that pride? Because what I find is, I don't want to speak for all of Logan, but sometimes there's some of that lacking. Like you can see a town and go, oh yeah, Brisbane, they're proud of South Bank, or they're proud of this section of it, and that, that bolsters them up, or the stadium or whatever. So what are some of the elements that you helped so that people didn't look at it as in, oh that's that place, oh we live in the right place.
Yeah, yeah.
We live in the, the poor area, or whatever, like how do you help them with that?
No, it's a great question. So under my leadership, under the umbrella of the departments we manage, we have both community development and economic development. So economic development are some of these larger projects, but the community development piece is just as strategic. And so we're making smaller programs. The NEP program is a program that we do under my shop. And so we allow grants.
Is that the NE what?
I'm sorry, NEP, Neighborhood Enhancement Program.
Okay.
So we'll allow these smaller communities to designate projects that we will then help to fund. We also leverage private money so they can have pride in these smaller projects so they can see change in their neighborhoods. We have a lot of, because we don't have a lot of funding, are very strategic in where we invest in commercial corridors, which I think are the investments, are like an area like we are in today. And then we hope that that will perpetuate more growth. So within our 52 neighborhoods, which is a lot for the money that we're talking about, we're putting money into commercial corridors, hoping that that spurs out into other parts of the neighborhood. So again, small wins, but we have a lot of programs that are tailored to make sure that people are seeing funding and projects in their neighborhood.
Some of those things like the bridge and So did you use some of the things like your bridge and some of your history to try and build on that more so than just, oh, it's going to be good when all these new buildings come in? Or, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. So one of the things we changed related, and this is a recent change because this is about the inclusion piece. So prior, we would work on projects, especially the ones where we own city property, right? So we're activating spaces. What we found was, we would get through the development process, and then we would engage the community. So what we did prior now, so when we own city-owned land, we take it out to RFP. We make the developers meet prior to coming up with conceptual idea, meet with the community so that they can have buy-in to that process, and that's changed the perception of a lot of things. And I think it's somewhat dynamic.
Okay, one more question right over here. Troy.
Yeah. So one of the efforts, great question. So if everyone didn't hear this, the question was about schools and what is the partnership with the city. So we have a unique structure in that we are in a county form of government. Our property taxes, similar to yours, that go to the state, ours go to the county. So within our agreements, there's a thought to how we fund those schools. They need more money, so that it's not like it's extremely helpful, but obviously it's a part of the solution. One of the best practices that we have is the Euler School. It's a community learning center. I'm sorry, I'm tongue-tied today.
Innovative.
Yeah, innovative. Yeah. But I would suggest that you guys look. I think NPR did a special, or National Geographic did a special on it. It's phenomenal. So basically what we're doing is activating the schools past the regular school day. And then we also provide social services while the kids are in school. So Lower Price Hill was an area of not Aboriginal, I mean, Appalachian descendants, low unemployment, graduation rates are terrible, and so a lot of challenges socially. What we did was provide those services into the actual school itself. So a child can walk out of their classroom and go to a dentist in one of the classrooms. It's actually built out. They also have social services related to different things. They have a dentist, eye care. So basically the kid never needs to leave, and it's all paid for. And so that way, you see your graduation rates increase. It's a great model. Yeah.
Well, I think there was more to that question, but Troy, you can ask Oscar offline. And you want to do a plug for Skyline Chili or Graders? No?
Yeah. So Skyline Chili is
you don't need
a
to,
franchise there. Okay, great.
But ladies and gentlemen, Oscar Bedolla, thank you very much for your time. And in November, vote one Mayor Cranley, and we'll be right, yeah.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, Oscar. So not only do we have two top-line international experts with us today, they both have very charming accents. So I think that's a tick for this conference. You've got Joaquim and Oscar, so thank you very much again. As you've heard this morning, one of the things that America is really leading in the innovation front is innovative financing and funding. They are absolutely killing Australia in that regard, just as Europe and Asia is killing Australia in digital democracy and in citizen engagement. So we've got a lot to learn. Oscar's with us today, so please have a conversation with him.